Okay, so the first one we're going to focus on is the proposed quarry to the east of Much Wenlock Road. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look. There is some maps and some more detailed things at the back if anyone needs to have a look. And I will hand you over to Graham, if possible, to give a short explanation of the sand and gravel extraction planning application, and then we can take questions if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so as just mentioned, there are some plans at the back of the room which relate to the two applications, in fact. At the top of the wall there are the outline application, and at the bottom I've put the scheme for the sand and gravel. Now, just dealing with the sand and gravel at the moment, it came in at the same time as the outline application, and the two are obviously interrelated in that the sand and gravel scheme involves the creation of a level development platform upon which the proposal is that houses would be constructed on a currently hilly area of the western side of the site. And the levels would be set down relative to existing levels, so there wouldn't be any visibility of the proposed development on that side of the site. So in terms of the planning situation, we've had the application since before Christmas. It was validated on the 10th of this month, and it went out to around 24 consultees, as did the outline application, both of them at the same time. There was a public notification, there are notices in the press, site notices have gone up, and we have a 56-day consultation public period for the outline application. I think that nominally the period for the sand and gravel site is 21 days, but we have indicated to the Parish Council that we will be happy to extend that, and obviously it's just after Christmas, so I think a similar sort of time frame for comments as the outline application is what will probably ultimately be expected. So we have consulted extensively over 24 planning consultees. Should say that the application for the outline is also, it affects a small area of Telford and Wrekin, and so everything that we've received for Shropshire is also being done in a kind of parallel way in Telford and Wrekin. But because the sand and gravel site is purely in Shropshire, it's only us that's dealing with that application, basically. So what it involves is the phased extraction of 1.9 million tonnes of sand and gravel over a 5-year period at a rate of just under 200,000 tonnes per annum. So is that right? 400,000 tonnes per annum. But with the proposal that 3/4 of that minimum goes out by rail. So that would leave another 100,000 tonnes maximum for delivery via the local road network. Now, I know from the dialogue we've had already very early on that highway concerns are one of the key elements of the sort of local community and parish council worries about the scheme. Now, what the company is saying with regard to the vehicle movements is that they will be controlled, they will be managed, there will be highway improvement works on either side of the Much Wenlock Road where it meets the Iron Bridge bypass and where it meets with the Bridgenorth Road, and indeed in other locations. But what they're basically saying is that there have been the amount of movements proposed equivalent to that occurring historically at the quarry site. So 23 movements per day, loads per day, or 46 individual movements back and forward is what the company has estimated it would be at a worst case if all the 100,000 tonnes they're proposing goes out each year. Now, I say there are a number of issues regarding whether it will all go out at that rate, but obviously the company needs to remove the amount of material proposed from the site in order to achieve a level development platform in the western area of the site in time as the progressive demolition works proceed. So if there was to be a delay, then that would affect the timing of the ongoing works if the outline application was approved. and then that would have additional cost implications for the company. So it's all very tightly choreographed. And just to go back, the bulk of the mineral is proposed to go out via the Albert Edward Bridge, the rail bridge. And assumptions about that seem to be quite positive, because there's been positive dialogue with Network Rail regarding the ability to strengthen the bridge to accommodate the vehicle movements off the site via rail. So I think we can be reasonably confident that we're not going to end up with any more than the maximum stated level via highways. But as I say, these are things that can also be conditioned. Another element that I think is a concern is where the vehicles that go out of the site are routed. And what the company has said is that bulk of this material is going to go into the Telford and West Midlands markets. It's going to go up the Iron Bridge bypass and onto the M54. Now, it hasn't precluded the prospect that some of that material may go locally down Buildwas Road to Shrewsbury. I think we need to very carefully review the implications of that. It might not be something that the council would be prepared to support. There is a mechanism which we can impose a legal agreement which restricts routing of these vehicles so that they can only go certain routes which we consider, and our Highways Authority in Shropshire Council considers suitable. So, I mean, that's highways. Getting back to what the proposal involves, it's proposed to break it down into 4 phases, and basically they're working in a way that minimises the visibility and maximises the screening. So you'll see 3 of the plans at the back there show that phasing and the way that they will be working. At no point will machinery be on top of any topography. All the working would involve coming from beneath the surface, from probably at least 10 metres beneath the surface. In terms of the processing of the plants, processing of the sand and gravel, it isn't proposed to wash it. It's all being processed dry. It's being processed by a low-profile screening plant, which will be situated towards the eastern end of the application area for the quarry sites. And it will be surrounded by 4.5 metre bunding. So you shouldn't see it, basically, because it'll be set down in the ground. There may be a very slight upstand, but there is an opportunity to put rapidly growing pre-coppice willow on that bund so that you wouldn't see any kind of plant protruding above that. Now, the application includes an environmental statement, which includes a series of environmental reports. So there are reports on highways, ecology, drainage, and 2 of the other very important considerations are noise and dust, and obviously that is a particular interest from perspective of the residents of Buildwas. So they've done quite a bit of initial evaluations, and they've come to the conclusions that it shouldn't cause any noise or dust impacts, given the screening, given the mitigation measures, given the distance to the nearest properties. But we will be looking at this and assessing it very carefully with our consultees, including the Council's Regulatory Services or Environmental Health team. And similarly with issues such as hydrology, we'll be looking at that with the Environment Agency, the Council's drainage scheme. Ecology, there are great potential with the ecology, because significant areas within the site can be put back to a biodiversity habitat, which can then be made accessible to the public to benefit from. But obviously this is all dependent on whether or not the outline application goes forward. And in fact, if the outline application doesn't proceed, we can't prejudice the outcome of this application. Then the company has still put forward proposals which indicate that they can do a high quality restoration for the sand and gravel site, where it is reincorporated as green fields. So I say the key message really is that there is a very detailed process with these applications. It's only just started, and we want to listen to what people are saying to us, and we want to factor that in. We want to put it back to the company, because you know the detailed issues around these parts more than anyone. And so if you have comments that you wish to make, then we would encourage you to go onto the council's website, www.planning.nsf.gov.uk, parish.gov.uk and type in the application numbers on the online search. I can give them to, well, you've already got them at the parish, but so I won't read them out.
We could leave these, and we could leave all this material here for you, so
Yeah.
it's available for the community, wherever you want to put it, and we can leave you with the reference numbers as well, which so that people can comment accordingly.
Sure, yeah. So I think the key point is nothing is predetermined. Obviously, there's been a stakeholder engagement exercise that the applicant Harworth has put in. That process is sort of substantially completed, leading to these applications. The council has a responsibility to ensure that the issues raised by these applications are properly assessed in context of the comments that we receive and the relevant national and local policies, and that is what we will be doing. Nothing is predetermined here. There is a presumption that the outline application will be carried forward as a strategic site in the Shropshire Council's SANDEV plan, which is a planning policy document, but the key questions are at a detailed planning level, and we're in the process of identifying them to determine whether or not the scheme before us is acceptable. And in that process, we are looking at comments from the local residents, and I can reassure that they will be taken into account. And what we want to do is to encourage this dialogue with the parish council, and so without any more to say, I'm happy to hear questions that you may have now, Chair.
Just a quick point, Chair, sorry for you. In making your comments, you can either comment directly to us, to Shropshire Council, via that reference number, or through the Parish Council. They're your democratically elected body and here to represent the views of the community as well. So you can do both. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I was just about to say so thank you. So to ourselves or the first question.
Just as a general one, that was an incredible amount of information to take in at one point in time. Can we break it down a bit going forward, so after each part we talk about something, we can potentially ask a question, otherwise we're going to get a little bit lost, because unless we make notes down to ask questions, we're going to be going back 10 minutes to talk about a point which was raised. But I suppose just two general questions. I think I kind of got the answer, but I want to double check. The outline application, the planning outline application, is that or is that not dependent upon the gravel applications? I think I heard you say if they don't get the outline plan permission, they will still have a separate application for the gravel. But if they don't get the gravel application first, what does that do to the outline planning application? Right,
Good question. Basically, they need a level development platform in which to construct the houses on the western part of the site. Now, the way that they're proposing to achieve that is to recover the sand and gravel. And not to sort of digress, but there is a policy in the Shropshire Council's SANDEV plan which seeks to avoid sterilisation of mineral. And if you build houses on top of a mineral, then you sterilise them.
Yeah.
So the principle of working the mineral in advance of development is well established. However, if for whatever reason it isn't possible to develop the sand and gravel sites, and as I say, everything is without prejudice at the moment, we wait to see what the consultees come back with, then they would have to look into how to level the topography. Because at the moment there's a fairly steep slope down within the site, and then there's another bump and a little valley in the middle.
I look at it, my bedroom window every morning.
They need to level it in order to make sense of it for the development of houses. You can't sort of build them all on steep slopes. There would have to be some form of cut to fill balance within the site beforehand. But yes, I wouldn't say that if the mineral scheme didn't progress, that would stymie the outline, but it would be a significant obstacle, and they would need to rethink a number of the assumptions in the outline application if that were the case.
So they'd have to resubmit their current outline application with that, because their current application is dependent upon the level field from the extraction. Is that fair to say?
I think that we can accommodate certain reasonable changes within an outline application. It is an outline, which means that it deals more with the general land use planning principles. The subsequent reserved matters application will deal more with the detail, types of houses and that sort of thing, if it succeeds. But there is some wriggle room within the outline application to accommodate changes. But if that were the case while the application was still live, that it became the case that the mineral scheme could not proceed for whatever reason, then that would trigger a re-evaluation of the master plan layouts. And if that resulted in a change that was too significant, then it would not be possible to accommodate that change within the current outline. But there is wriggle room, so there would be an ability to do some change within the outline if that were the case.
The abbreviated answer is it doesn't stop you continuing with the outline application.
One question just on that. Is it going to be the same members of the Shropshire Council Committee, call it what you will, who's going to decide upon the sand and gravel application and on the outline planning? Or will there be two independent teams?
It's the same. It'll be the same committee. In Shropshire, all applications are delegated to officers unless there's a trigger for it to go to committee.
So the same
I'm just describing this.
Gravel will review the outline as well.
Yes.
What I'm saying is these are applications that are likely to be determined by planning committee.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. It's the same committee.
Does that not cause you a huge conflict of interest? Because in my world, that would cause a huge conflict because.
Why?
Because you've got two applications that are almost interrelated with each other, and you know that if you review the sand and gravel one first, that's going to have a huge detrimental impact on the outline planning one. Therefore, you've almost incentivised yourself to agree the sand and gravel because then you can pass the outline planning. You can't view them, no matter what you're saying, you cannot view them in isolation because you said yourself they're interrelated. So to have the same people viewing both of them causes me a huge concern because I'm a lawyer. And that causes a huge conflict on your fiduciary duties as council members, and that's something that I'm not comfortable with.
They would go to the same committee, basically. That would be the objective. There would be an interrelationship, but I think the key point that I mentioned to you is that if the sand and gravel site fails, then it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the outline application. But obviously, if we took the sand and gravel site first to the same committee with the outline to follow, if the members decided to refuse the outline application, then we would not determine the outline, refuse the mineral application, we would not determine the outline application, we would defer it to another committee in order that the applicant had time to review their options. I don't think there is a conflict of interest there. I think that there are many examples I could cite to you where interrelated applications have gone to the same committee. The important point is that you are not prejudicing the subsequent decision with the prior decision if it doesn't align with the sort of the overall aspirations of the developer. You can withdraw them and review the situation, and there's an established precedent for that.
There might be an element, as Graham says, in the process we have to sort of decouple them, but I don't think it prevents the same committee from considering both aspects.
If I sat on that committee, I'd be really concerned if I was asking to advise on both applications.
Our committees are legally advised, as you appreciate, and if there was any perception of a conflict of interest legally, the members would be advised as such.
What we also do routinely for very major application is we may have a briefing, we may have a pre-briefing for members to inform them of the sort of detailed legal ramifications of the decisions they're taking. So, you know, they are very well advised. The other thing I would say is that the members are expert in taking decisions on major applications, and because we're a unitary authority, all the mineral applications are also determined by the same committee. And I think, in fact, that the fact that the members deal with both schemes and have skill sets related to both of them is actually a benefit, not a detriment in a legal sense, provided they're carefully briefed.
Thank you. Can we move on just so to give a bit more of a sort of, so we can get our views heard. Is there anyone else that has, yeah?
Hello, I'm Sue Jones from Maitland Eaton Constantine Parish Council. As we're on the B4380, we're obviously concerned about the traffic. I think most people here are the thought of heavy goods coming this way is horrific, to be honest, because it's bad enough now without them. And Eton Constantine, that is definitely a rabbit run for people going up to the A5 quarry, and we have trouble with lorries coming down there now, even if we're told they're not going to come down there, they do. So we are obviously very concerned. Will there be strict planning conditions put on the application for Harwood so that they cannot use this route? And how will that be monitored?
Yes, I mentioned in my kind of rather sort of detailed initial brief that yes, there is a mechanism called a Section 106 legal agreement which allows us to impose routing restrictions. Now, what I would say is that the non-technical summary, the application details for the highways for the mineral scheme do not preclude the possibility of some HGV movements via the B roads towards the Shrewsbury markets. Now, what I qualify that as is that clearly it's a minor road, clearly it isn't suitable, it hasn't been built for HGV traffic, and there are run issues with Leaton Quarry, as you say. So we would be looking very closely at whether or not the applicant's aspiration to take a limited number of HGV movements towards Shrewsbury via the B road is something that we could support. And I can't give you any indication of what the outcome of that is, other than we fully recognise the limitations of that highway. But I think that it is going to be naturally self-limiting, because the core of the market, the vast majority of the demand is in Telford and the west flank of Wolverhampton, and that's where I would expect 90% at least of the traffic to go automatically before any traffic control measures are put in place. But we do have that option.
Okay. There was a hand over there, I think, somewhere.
You did say that Harwood's will have removal of this stuff will have a minimum dust and noise impact. Is that correct?
What I said was that their environmental impact assessment, which accompanies the application, which you can view online, is concluding that given the distances to the nearest sensitive receptors, given the mitigation measures proposed and the physical layout of the excavation, the quarry sites, their conclusion is that there isn't going to be an issue with regard to noise and dust. Now, we're not going to leave it at that and take it at face value. We've consulted the regulatory services, or environmental health, as we used to call them, people, and we'll be looking in great detail. We'll be collaborating with Telford and Wrekin also have environmental health people, and obviously there are interrelationships with the construction phase of the outline application, demolition. So we will be working in tandem with Telford and Wrekin to get the bigger picture, as it were, of the totality of the development. But the initial conclusions appear valid and indicate that there shouldn't be problems.
You're doing that, right? You're trying to evaluate what disruptions can be caused in the noise and dust. Where did Harwood's get their information to say there won't be any dust and there won't be any noise? Where did they get their information?
There are particular methodologies which are employed in creating air quality and noise reports, and there are national standards, and these. Yes, there are detailed noise and air quality reports which I would encourage you to look at. Now, as I say, I don't want to sort of argue in support of their conclusions. What I want to emphasise is that we're not taking them at face value. We will be checking and validating them using our own consultee resource as experts.
So just there's 120 on the sand and gravel. There's 129, if I remember rightly, documents to view, of which 129 have many, many more pages of gobbledygook to the people that don't really understand, and I don't. Technical stuff, there's probably hours and hours of reading of that stuff that's been produced. Hours.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and in fact...
And yeah, we've got 21 days.
No, what I've said is that there's 56 days for the outline application from the 10th of February, from the 10th of January, and we are receptive to a similar extension for the outline for the quarry scheme. It's just that when it went out with the default 21 days on it. So I think that we've already granted extension to the parish council to respond, and I think it makes sense to align the timescale for comments on the outline with that. But I accept your additional point that the complexities and the sheer volume of documents makes it very difficult to sort of understand as a lay person what they're saying. And I can't encourage you to go in any detail into the air quality and noise reports if you don't have a degree of initial understanding of that. What I think I would say, though, is that we will be working with the parish council, and we will be explaining in detail the issues of concern that they have had, and trying to explain what the consultees are saying. It may be that we can provide that in a distilled sense that allows the parish council to trickle that down in a way that is understandable to the local population.
May I add? Because I think what you've raised is a really good point, actually, because you're overwhelmed with information. There's a hell of a lot of technical information, as Graham says. Within all of that, there is this document, which is a non-technical summary. Now, we're not expecting anyone in the room, and there will be different expertise within the room, but we're not expecting everyone to have a complete understanding. But what you could say in that, I've got some concerns about noise, and I'd like you to, through the officer report, through the consideration of the application, or dust, or whatever it is, demonstrate to the in the evaluation of the issues that those issues have been properly understood and evaluated, and if themes emerge through the consultation, and they quite often do with an application. We suspected before the meeting started that there'd be a lot of discussion about highways, actually, but it might be that you're concerned about noise and dust and other things. If those are the key things that start to emerge, we can provide, I think, a bit more of a focused response on that and help you.
That's minuted then. That's minuted in this meeting.
Yeah.
What I would add is that Shropshire is a unitary authority, so it deals with every type of application, including minerals and waste. It has long experience in dealing with this, and there are over a dozen operational quarry sites in Shropshire. I think around 7 at the moment, about to be 8 operational sand and gravel sites, and generally I think we can derive some comfort from the experiences we've had over many years with the operation of these sites. They don't generally tend to generate significant amounts of dust or noise, and there are many instances.
They're dug in a lot further than what you're digging in.
I beg your pardon?
They're dug in a lot deeper than what you're digging in. You're only 10 metres down.
The maximum depth is going to be around 25 metres. That's at the back slope of as you're coming off the Tickle
Yeah,
Hill.
that's because it's high.
Yes.
You're 10 metres off the road.
Yes.
You're not a deep quarry.
Yeah, that is the case. Having said that, there are other examples of quarries that are not particularly deep and work progressively in Shropshire at the moment. For instance, the Plymouth Estate site at Bromfields, where the depth of excavation is rarely more than 10 metres. They're wet screening the mineral.
Slightly different.
Yeah, well, it's more of a potential disturbance if it's wet screen, because you need additional items of processing plant. So the dry screening minimises the footprint.
You create less dust. So if on a wet screen thing you create an awful lot of dust, the machines create the dust to a certain
Yes, I think it's the management of the stockpiles.
And dustier.
Yeah, stockpiles and circulation. But there are examples of dry screen quarry sites, and even the wet screen quarries, they tend to do dry screening in the quarry voids. But I do take your point that a number of them have a greater height difference than what is proposed. What they're proposing in this particular site is 4.5 metre bunds around the plant site. It's a tightly contained plant site. I think a key issue with it is going to be the availability of water for on-site suppression, and I think that these are questions that we will have at a more detailed level with the company, but we're not going to be in the position of approving anything if it's not going to conform with the environmental expectations. So generally speaking, the experience we've had with quarries has been good. We don't tend to get amenity complaints from them, but I take your point that each one is different, and I think we have an opportunity to ensure that they've got sufficient bowsering on site so they can suppress the water. They're not stocking too high, they're not dropping from too much of a height. There are many, many mechanisms that we can employ and will employ if the scheme is found to be acceptable to minimise dust. Ultimately, I think the separation of the nearest properties is also a factor. We're significantly further away here to the nearest properties than we are at a number of other Shropshire quarries where there are properties within 50 metres and we don't have noise or dust complaints.
Are those quarries though on the side of a hill? Because this one's obviously, if you look at the location of it, you've got the perfect storm, no pun intended. You've got a backdrop of a sheer steep side with wood incline. It's going to portray the noise one direction only, and you're mining on a raised platform. So again, the noise has got no sound barrier to hit, it's just going to go one direction. Well,
I think if you look at the phasing plans behind you'll see that that's not the case. What they're proposing is to excavate into the slope, into the excavation batter. So they're actually using the batter that they're excavating as an additional screening mechanism. So yeah, I mean, I'm not an acoustics expert, but I suspect that you would need a much steeper slope and a much barer slope for there to be any significant sort of echo type effects from this type of operation. So, we haven't experienced noise issues from other Shropshire quarry sites, not even the crushed rock sites, which are much, much larger. So, I think we can derive some comfort from the operation of the existing sites in Shropshire, but we're not complacent, and we will, I can assure you, be asking the right questions of the technical consultees.
If you go and fire a rifle on that land like a shooting rifle, you can hear it echo, you can hear it from miles, and that's just one rifle, that's not an excavator.
I think we're looking at different types of noise. You're looking at a point source of noise, a particular sort of sharp surge, and that is more inclined to create an echo type effect. What you've got with quarrying operations generally is you've got the low humming of a plant site, and you've got the diesel engine of the excavators and dumper trucks, and I think there are a lot of heavy vehicles operating on the Iron Bridge site, albeit not as far west as the quarry scheme, but I'm not aware of any noise complaints arising from that in Iron Bridge, although it's not exactly equivalent. What I would say is we haven't had problems elsewhere generally, but we are not complacent and taking the right advice, and if we're not happy that we can condition it and control it effectively, then that's going to be reflected in the resolution.
Where it can be helpful is if you can give us your local knowledge, as Graham said at the beginning, you were just then particularising the topography and saying I can hear it from here or there. That's the sort of thing that would be helpful to us, your local knowledge and experience of the area.
Sorry, I'm very keen to listen to your views, but if we can try and just keep on track with the answers, just because I want to get as much information as we can. I'll come back to you in a second, but you had your hands up over there.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. We live, and I'd like you to remember that we've already got a quarry. It's not a working quarry, but we have that amount of lorries every day. We live right opposite it. I see they've got a time thing for this new 7 till 7 at night. And 7 till 1 on a Saturday, and we've got to, put up with this noise all that time, I think. When you get home from work, you want it quiet.
Yeah.
Will they be working on their fields till 7 o'clock at night?
I think that there will be hours of operation restrictions, and clearly I think perhaps the ones for the existing quarry at Buildwas, which obviously isn't a quarry anymore, it deals with inert material recycling.
We've got all them lorries as well as all these new lorries.
I think that the last permission for that site was, I think it was at least 20 years ago now, so I think times move on, and I think we're looking we would be looking at a much more stringent
Nobody
regime.
controls the dust on the road. If you want to look at Buildwas Bridge, it is filthy. When it was Harry Price's, it was regularly swept. Not anymore. Nobody bothers.
It's obviously just recently been acquired by JPE.
Not recently.
Well, a couple of years, relatively
Well, they
speaking.
should be cleaned.
I think it's a separate issue, but thank you for drawing it to our attention.
Drains are never cleaned out.
We will look into it. As I say, this is a classic case of where a local person has detailed knowledge that unless we're able to acquire that knowledge, we're not aware of
They're
issue.
fair enough with
And
us.
I have no doubt were these schemes to come forwards, we would be able to benefit from detailed knowledge of people as to any effects. One thing I would emphasise is that this isn't just simply a process during the determination of the application. This site will, we will maintain an interest in this site, a control through planning if it were to proceed, and the detailed relationship that we are intending to maintain with the parish council would continue through the operational phase. If there were concerns that you as residents had, either reporting them directly to us or via the parish council, then we will be in a position to respond. Now, in the case of Buildwas Quarry, I hadn't heard that you had issues with dust and the hours of working. I know now, and I can communicate with JPE because we have regular dialogue with them.
We asked them to clean outside hours.
Yeah.
You're right opposite. And they did. But they didn't do any more. They go up and down the lane, and they came over and did the footpath to our end of our drive. But it's terrible. But while we're on this road, we're on Last Junction, which they're going to change. Why are they moving that junction away from the Sand Quarry Road? Why has it been moved?
I think that
It's going to be in line with my kitchen window now.
I don't think that where it is at the moment is optimal because there's a bend in the road and they need to actually have a wider visibility display in order to comply with modern standards for accesses for larger sorts of vehicle. Now, I think, I know where your property is in relation to access, and I think that that does raise issues as far as amenity, and I think we need to be sure that the vehicles access in an appropriate way and that they're not revving and they're not shining their lights in. And if there are issues with the alignment of that junction, then I think we need to look at them to make sure that there's not going to be an issue for your particular case because you're so close to the junction.
Come and have a look.
What I would say is if we can exchange details afterwards, then I'm very happy to come down and have a look, basically. And the same applies for any issues that are specific to individual residents here. That we will investigate them. And we will feed that back into whatever control regimes that we can apply.
Thank you. Sorry, there was a lady.
I have a concern because I presume it's still the JPE who will be operating Corrie.
My understanding is that JPE are still contracted by Harworth to operate the proposed sites. Although obviously the Bridge North Quarry site is no longer, the Buildwas Quarry site is no longer in the red line application boundary and therefore by implication will be operated as it is at the moment as a sort of separate entity. But they are intending to employ JP, is my understanding, to do the groundworks on the quarry sites and then it's dry screened and shipped off. That's my current understanding.
So, they've just been fined and they've had issues with the quarry at Seaton that they've failed to complete on and install.
Well, I think that the situation at Seaston is it's obviously it's a different site. It's quite a complicated one. That particular site is slap bang in the middle of rural Staffordshire. It doesn't have a very good access at all. It is closing. They have had to extend the timescales there because they've had delays with their other application.
I can't really answer.
But I can't. No, I suppose I can't really. But what the reason I'm aware of that is because it's opposite another site in Shropshire that has been delayed, and their proposal was that they would move from Seaston to this other site at Shipley, but there have been some issues with that, but I think that because they hadn't closed when they thought they would, there's been a local sensitivity, but because it's not a very good access to that quarry site anyway, there are sensitivities heightened with regard to the traffic. In the case of this site, a purpose-built access is being created, but as I said to you, we need to look very closely at the sort of suitability of the access as it currently is and the amenity effects before we can sort of consider it to meet relevant criteria.
It couldn't be taken out by the railway on the extra vehicles that they're looking at putting on.
Well, I think that the bottom line is if the railway proves for whatever reason not to be deliverable, that they will have to fundamentally review their proposals regarding the levels in the quarry site, because I don't think it would be at all acceptable to Harworth to significantly increase the timescale during which the mineral has to be exported because they can't get it out by rail, nor would it be acceptable to Shropshire Council. Because I don't think the local residents would accept it either.
Nor have they said they could increase the frequency or volume of traffic on the roads. I think they're sort of taking that baseline as what's previously been permitted.
Exactly. There is a finite capacity on those roads, even via the Iron Bridge bypass. So we are acutely aware of the sensitivities of traffic, and so there are certain fixed limits. So if they can't take it by rail, then it's a fundamental reappraisal, basically.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm coming to you next. There's just one more. Sorry.
You talk about the noise rule. Does the noise rule apply now with the demolition of the power station?
Yes, the noise is subject to what's called a construction management plan, which was approved under the application to demolish the power station, and it continues to be enforced. I'm aware that there have been some concerns about some infringements to that in terms of hours of working, and all I can say at the moment is that they're currently being investigated by Shropshire Council in association with Telford and Wrekin Council.
We live on Billview Park on the back of the power station. Well, I'm an early riser anyway. At 6 o'clock Sunday morning, there was more noise and steel falling and whatever they were doing. It was worse than the towers going on. And that was at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning.
What I would say is this appears to be an intermittent, ongoing problem. We have alerted it to the demolition contractor at Harworth, and we have engaged directly with the planning manager at Harworth as well. It is a live issue. It's currently under investigation. Clearly, it's not satisfactory for working to occur more than an hour before the allotted time. I think, unfortunately, these types of things can sometimes occur where, for instance, a contractor has to arrive from a distance for a particular job and may not have been fully briefed of the stipulations working on site. I don't know the detail of these instances, but I say we are aware of them, we are looking into them, and I think that if we can establish a kind of effective report back mechanism through the Parish Council to Shropshire, I can reassure you that these issues will be investigated as and when they arise.
And will they be working Saturdays and Sundays on this quarry?
The quarry operations...
That's to be agreed.
Yes, but they proposed hours of work.
Yeah,
we have to agree. But they're proposing, I believe it's from 7 a.m. Until, I think it's 6:30 p.m. We haven't agreed that on weekdays. I can check that with the parish afterwards, and from 7 till 1 on Saturdays with no Sunday or bank holiday working. And I think that's broadly similar to the conditions that apply for the demolition at the moment. But say we will look to see whether that is appropriate, because there are other amenity considerations with the outline application and the quarry scheme, which may be different from those which apply for the demolition scheme.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you for waiting.
Hello. Can I just ask, in the planning statement, I've had a read through it, it's quite a meaty beast to read. It does say under transport that they don't need to do an environmental impact assessment because there are no more lorries than when the power station is in operation. But this is a separate thing, and I really think Shropshire Council should insist on environmental impact assessment on this.
It's a very good point. If I just clarify the terminology, they have submitted an environmental impact assessment for both applications. What they have said in their transport statement on the minerals scheme is they don't need to do a full traffic impact assessment, which is a different thing, basically they're relying on the fact that the levels are similar to what they have been historically. Now, we have consulted with the Highway Authority in Shropshire, and equivalent consultation taking place with the authority in Telford and Wrekin. And obviously a significant proportion of the quarry traffic will go out via Telford and Wrekin. Now, whether or not we accept their position that there shouldn't be a detailed traffic impact assessment remains yet to be determined. There are potentially interrelationships between the traffic from the outline application, should that progress, and traffic from the mineral scheme. And we need to make sure that the assumptions about traffic in the outline application factor fully in the mineral traffic implications as well. So, these issues are not yet resolved, but we are fully aware of the implications and the need for appropriate information. I can't say whether the highways authorities will accept no traffic impact assessment for the mineral application when they have done one for the outline application. What I would say is that more information is being gathered on the outline application at the moment. The modelling is being refined, and we expect within the next month or so that the modelling will be completed and there will be a further reconsult on the detailed conclusions of that modelling. But as I say, we fully recognise the concerns about highway impacts, and let me emphasise that we are adamant that we are going to control things in a way which is appropriate for the limitations of the local highway infrastructure. And if there are requirements for mitigation, that they are fully implemented at the appropriate times within these developments should they proceed.
My concern is, regardless to whether you quarry and all the rest of it, once you've got the quarry out and it's all done, you've got your flat pan, are you still using the same roads that you're putting in here now for the quarry, which you're going to bring out roughly, we're going to put 1,000 loads in, so 2,000 cars. Are those roads going to be there for when you're going to bring the extra traffic into our community? The same roads, so the same roads that's going in past the quarry, because it's all going to be linked in. Because they'll link the whole system in, so you can come out and you can exit it more than one place. You can exit. I know you can say you can go down into the gorge, you can go up into Wedlock and everything, but we're going to have 2,000 extra cars between the hours of 8 and 9 and 6 and 7 at night.
What I would say is...
What are we going to put in? Because the roads aren't going to be able to take it as you come out onto the junctions or onto the main road going up to the bypass. We already have a serious amount of crashes down there as it is now. There's railings down there which are from numerous amounts of crashes which are bent down there now, steps. So it's not as if crashes don't happen now, and you're now going to instigate a serious amount of more traffic into the area.
What I would say is that we're dealing with a 15-year project for the outline and a 7-year, 5 years for the mineral extraction plus another 2 years to reinstall the rest. Now, the delivery of housing within the outline, if it proceeds, will be staggered so that you would have a 3-year overlap between the time when the first houses in phase 1 of the... You'll see the phasing plan on the back wall. The first of those houses begin to be occupied and when the mineral extraction actually ceases. Yeah. Now, you've hit a nail on the head with this question because the interrelationships of that residential traffic with the quarry traffic will need to be looked at. There needs to be a way of managing it so that you avoid conflicts.
You can sort the quarry traffic out quite easily by actually stipulate it in the planning that they don't come this way, because there's many quarries that have to comply with that now. There are certain roads that they can't use. And I follow JP lorries to shoot through most mornings. So I know it's going to happen, it's going to go that way, it's going to go through Leighton, and it's going to go through all the little... And they are too big to take this road.
Well, with respect, we haven't decided whether we can agree with their suggestion that lorries should go, a small amount of the lorries should go via Leighton. We may well, because of the sort of wider sort of implications from travel, we may well resist that. Just because a planning consent 20 years ago for Buildwas Sand Quarry currently allows JPE to drive towards Shrewsbury doesn't mean at all that we will accept it.
That's a small forest. We're not talking small when you're taking a million. And I know you're not taking it all out. You tend to take so much through rails. But there's nobody stipulating that's going to happen. That's such a grey area that half we go out by road.
We basically no more than 100,000 tonnes. That is the maximum that will go out each year. And let me reassure you that we will condition that. But in practice, I don't think that it will be that many. There may be limitations with the Telford market, so that's an upper figure. You know, how much of that material can be assimilated into a market where there's already some supply from existing quarries. Around 4 quarries within a 30-mile radius can supply into that. But we can condition it, and we can do things like sticking CCTV at the junction to determine which way they're turning. And that is a precedent. We've done that at other Shropshire quarry sites. We can do a kind of 2 strikes and you're out type legal agreement sort of. So if a vehicle with the quarry's livery is identified and the number plate is traced back to a particular driver, that driver can be banned from using the site under the terms of the legal agreement. We don't have that with Buildwas Quarry. There are all manner of controls that we can impose to ensure that lorries go the right way.
Which surely somebody's going to plan at some point for all this extra traffic and how you're going to deal with it. There's got to be somewhere that this has been drawn up that you know how you're going to deal with it, regardless of whether most quarries don't have the extra traffic that we are now going to have to sort of endure.
Well, that's why we're all in different phases, it gives us a chance to get used to what we're doing. So by the end of it, we're so used to it.
Basically,
2,000 cars every morning, 2,000 cars.
That is the level of 15 years' time when all of this development has been built out, assuming it is accepted. Now, what I would say is there is a very comprehensive traffic evaluation process going on at the moment. We have some initial findings in the application, in the environmental statement for the outline application, but there is a further detailed body of information which we're expecting within the next month, which will ratify or otherwise the assumptions about vehicle movements that are put in. One thing I would say is that this is a worst case scenario that they've been modelling, and that there are potential offsets. There's the opportunity to stick a light railway system in, for instance, and that would knock a significant amount of traffic off that would otherwise be there.
You've got a perfectly good railway system there. It just needs connecting to something. You've already got a railway there that should, in my personal view, should be used.
And that is something that I think we've wholeheartedly agree with you with. It's clearly going to add to the sustainability of the scheme to deliver that. We hope very much that it is feasible.
We're going to end up with series and series of traffic lights, like Lightmore, because that's the sort of houses you're putting into it, which is I know it's a completely different council, but there's just lights because that's the easy way of dealing with something.
I think that the proposals,
because that just impacts on me personally, because my property is going to be near where you're going to be sticking a set of lights. So then I become part of. I've got to sit and look at. I'm looking at a lot of cars.
I think have you ever been down at Buildwas Bridge between 5 and 6 o'clock? I've seen
Because
it.
that's where I live and that's where it's going to impact, because you're going to push it all out. You can get it all out onto a road, but it's going to hit a
Well,
T
let me emphasise that the role of the planning authority is to test what the applicant is putting in. I'm not subscribing to these things. What I'm saying is this is the information the applicant has put forward, and this is the additional information they're about to provide. We're not here to endorse that information. If you have negative comments to make about it, then we will listen to that and we will put that back to the applicant. I'm not in a position to endorse anything at the moment. It's not our role. Our role is to impartially evaluate what the company is putting forward, and that is what we shall do with the benefit of our consultees and hopefully with the local knowledge that is in this room.
And that's the sort of questions that we want to try to get so that we can pass those on. Did you want to have...
Just a quick question, just to try and broaden the debate out a bit. Lots of people I've spoken to are really worried about the speed of the traffic and the amount of the traffic and how we're going to cope with the traffic. And what they've said is, is there any possibility that Harworths could put the roundabout and the other mitigation measures in prior to starting the work?
Right, well, certainly that is a point that we will bring up with them. Clearly, within a project of this nature, proposal of this nature, there will be a number of key bits of infrastructure that will need to be delivered. Now, I think that early delivery of some of the highway mitigation could very well go a long way towards indicating, a positive response on their part. And certainly, Councillor Wilde, that is something that I think we will definitely put to Harworths. At what stage are they proposing to deliver these highway mitigations, and can it be brought forward? So thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, because
On that, though, there is a conflict though, because me personally, they're going to like a big fat roundabout outside my house. I prefer they did it in 6 years' time, not in 1 year's time. If I'm just talking from my own point of view, because I've got the houses be there first, and then they put the roundabout in after, because then it has the least impact on me.
Yeah.
As I say, timing of development is critical, and it's yet to be decided when the roundabouts go in, when the traffic lights, when the school, when the community facilities are put in. All of these things are sort of open for detailed discussion, and this is good that we're here today, because it will help the parish council to write its shopping list, as it were, which we can then put back to the company to demonstrate the local priorities.
Yeah, I was thinking more about the speed limit on the Much Wenlock Road, because the cars got there so fast. No, but if there were actually vehicle activated signs and some sort of mitigation on the road to actually slow some of the traffic down.
The location of the roundabout won't stop them from speeding. There's only one area of straight which starts at White's Place and ends opposite our place, and the roundabout where it's situated won't really stop that.
No, but what about reducing the speed limit and putting in vehicle activated signs and a speed camera?
That makes no difference to people. There's a vehicle activated sign out there, and some people go through the village so fast, they'll pass the sign before it has a chance to light up.
I think there are many different mechanisms that can be used to calm traffic. Obviously, we don't want to delay the traffic, but we need them to drive safely.
Yeah.
And I think it's, certainly with the two axes, particularly the roundabout, I think it will slow traffic down inevitably. You're not going to drive at 60 miles an hour around mini roundabouts. I think there are many issues that could potentially be employed. I think what we need to do is look at the mitigation proposals that the company is proposing and their consultant, and identify whether they are likely to resolve the concerns in a reasonable way, or whether there is opportunity to consider further mitigation measures if appropriate.
You will have on record about the speed on the Much Wenlock Road, that's where we live. The last evaluation that we were given information on was the average speed past our house was 72 miles an hour, with a max of 102.
On the Much Wenlock Road?
Yes. Past my house, I'm telling you, we operate also a corridor there, and people are turning left out of our house to go towards Much Wenlock, and people are coming down that road overtaking, doing 70, 80 miles an hour. Now, the Shropshire Council have basically said, don't worry, we put in 50 mile an hour limits. Well, no, it's not wanted. So therefore 50 mile an hour, might as well be 30, might as well be 20. So they come round to this gentleman here on the road going down towards Buildwas, and there's a blind right-hand turn. Blind, it is blind. And if it wasn't for this gentleman here cutting the verge, it would even be more blind. They're coming down at 70 miles an hour, they're coming up at 70 miles an hour. Nobody in Shropshire Council was interested.
Right.
You look, it goes back, Claire knows about it, we wanted double white lines to stop these idiots from overtaking. And you know what the response was? We mustn't do that because it stops people from overtaking slow-moving farm traffic. Look it up.
I think traffic movements in this local area clearly a very important issue to bottlenecks. I think that I would expect that there would have been traffic speed counts, traffic number counts on the Wenlock Road, and I would expect that any mitigation and assumptions made would feed into that. But what I think, we're at a situation now where we're going to assess that information that's got. We're using the highway authorities as our technical guides, and we want to listen to what you're saying, and we want to see that any mitigation that is proposed is fit for purpose.
I'm glad you do, because nobody's listened to us in the past.
What I would suggest is that there is a local joint committee mechanism where an association of parish councils can raise traffic issues, and they can be but the local joint committee can involve highways officers as well. They can elevate a situation.
I just wanted to say there's evidently a pre-existing problem here, an issue here. We're dealing tonight with the planning application. I think what Councillor Wilde was saying is, if there are sort of impacts generated by the application, might we be able to deal with some of those sooner? And you've got a pre-existing problem, and you've got some evidence with what you said. It's a very specific number, 72. Yeah.
I think it'd be nice to see what you propose to put there.
We're not proposing.
Or whoever, whoever's
yeah.
proposing. I know you're not proposing, but you've obviously seen plans, parts of it, because I kind of know how it works. So there's obviously been proposals and talks about how you're going to deal with 1,000 cars, and all those people that you're going to get away from this development you're building, because there's people working on it. They have already had a plan of some sort drawn up on this path. I think it'd be nice that it would be shared now, so we can honestly discuss on, because all we're discussing on is a quarry, and where we obviously can see where there's houses, but there's no other infrastructure being put in. It's obviously going to affect all of us, which are living here.
Well, there are proposed mitigation measures. What I would draw your attention to is the highways impact assessment in the outline application. Now, accepting that there are many documents on that, perhaps there's an opportunity for us to flag up the key elements of that to the parish council in order that can be put back. There's a series of plans showing individual junctions where mitigation is proposed, and I'm not fully familiar with what's proposed all along the Wenlock Road, but we can review that and we can come back to the parish council, and if you don't consider that that's adequate, then we can make sure that the highway authority is aware of that, and we together we can reach hopefully a realistic but optimal solution.
Yeah, so anything obviously can be emailed, and we can try and seek a answer for you.
Well, I think it'd be nice for us to see what is planned, because obviously there's junctions you're putting in there now, but there's obviously other junctions where you've got to deal with traffic from as well. So there's obviously going to be issues, things put on there, which I see if there's going to be traffic lights, because there's pretty much nothing else you can put there.
You can increase stacking capacity as well, so that
you've got a bridge,
you're not,
unless you're putting a new bridge in.
I think there may be some scope with the Iron Bridge bypass Wenlock Road junction, but
if you're going to stack them up that bank, you may as well have an ambulance that's out there now.
Yeah.
I think
you may as well just start building something that you can have, because there's that many traffic there.
Yeah, the right turning manoeuvres in particular is an issue cutting across.
Coming out the bank.
Yeah. These are being looked at in detail, and this is why we don't have the full highways information at the moment, because these are complex issues and they have to be fully modelled. And I think, you know, when this next batch of highway information comes out, let me say that we will make sure that the parish council is appraised of that and the implications, so that we can have a kind of a sensible discussion about your concerns and how they are being addressed.
Well, I agree that they're a complex matter, but they're a complex matter that should be dealt with at the beginning of it, because you've got to start somewhere, you've got to get people away from it.
They have been dealt with. The current information accompanying the application gives confidence that there shouldn't be issues if these measures are adopted. What we're looking at now is ratifying those conclusions, which already have had some sort of detailed evaluation. They wouldn't have been put forward in this application had they not had that evaluation. But what they're doing now, the applicant's highway consultant is doing some very detailed computer modelling regarding the anticipated traffic flows, and that will inform the detailed design of the mitigation measures.
I've seen that tube done.
The main harvest, I've done a little bit of research on harvest. The site that we have here is nothing like they've ever had in the past. Nothing like it. They've got transport links, M62, A6 and everything else. Here, it is nothing like any other project that they've had. Certainly from a traffic infrastructure point of view. And also, I will mention that they are, and I really do think they've done a fantastic job with brownfield sites. Which comes on to my next point. I have a solution. Why are we building on Greenfield? Why are we building opposite Buildwas Abbey? Why are we building in a World Heritage Site? And why are we disrupting the traffic? There's the solution. Stop it. And therefore we won't have any of these problems whatsoever.
Okay.
And let them handle brownfield sites, because they are experts at brownfield sites, because they say so.
Okay, well, the Shropshire Council's policy team has taken to the council, the full council, its proposals to include the greenfield land as well as the brownfield land within the Ironbridge area as a strategic development site. We need to evaluate whether or not the inclusion of the greenfield land is sustainable, is acceptable, delivers benefits. There are costs, yes, you're in greenfield land, but there are benefits. One of the issues, I think, is there's a very, very substantial cost indeed in the demolition and the rehabilitation of the existing brownfield sites. And there needs to be some kind of, so let's say, offset to that in order to ensure that the level of benefits in the site as a whole that are, potentially there can be delivered. If you take the housing out from the western site, that's a third of the total housing numbers. That's going to affect the calculations. The other point, though, is that we are on land which is going to potentially be sterilised of mineral if it's not worked. The availability of the mineral could also offset, as could the selling on of the pulverised fuel ash. So all of these things assist Harworth in achieving a financially balanced scheme where the offsets can sort of mitigate the huge costs of the demolition works. And I think that we have to assess. At the moment, the council has agreed that it will support from a policy perspective the inclusion of this western area. But let me emphasise that in determining this application, we will be looking at the sort of individual facets of it, and if there is, a particular concern about the western area, if there are additional sort of environmental limitations with it, then we will be raising those questions with Harworth. But at the moment, the council as a whole has taken a decision that from a planning policy perspective, it supports the inclusion of this western area. And there are sort of behind the scenes, there are clear financial reasons why the viability of the scheme is interdependent on the inclusion of those areas.
That's not technically true though, because when Harworth first spoke to us, and I've got a technical question on land in a second, they said to us they had to develop that land first in order to afford to do the demolition. Now they've flipped it 360 and they're doing the demolition first and the building land 6 years later. But when you look at their statutory accounts and how much they acquired the land for, and you can't get the precise figure, but you can do a reverse engineering it as less than 5 million, you then say, actually, if you just resold off the land today, they would make a profit. So I understand what you say from a commercial perspective. I don't necessarily agree with the hard work analysis. They need that development to make a profit. That's just factually
I think you
not
need to
correct.
understand the cost of the demolition work, which is much, much greater than the acquisition
Understood,
cost.
but then they can still turn a profit. But I just want to ask you my technical question because it kind of affects the land issue. Do you know, and I think I know the answer, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the agricultural land on that site is rated grade 2 and grade 3A.
Yeah, there's around 22 hectares of grade 2 and 3A land, so best and most versatile
Just
agricultural
for
land.
the benefit of the room, the way they grade agricultural land is from a scale of 1 to 5 if it's high quality versatile land, and if it's not, it's then ungraded. And I suppose my question is, I understand that the council also have an obligation to protect its best and most versatile agricultural land in its county.
Yes.
And if that land is grade 2, again, how could you even consider allowing an application to demolish that existing grade 2 agricultural land?
Right. Well, there is a concept in planning which is known as planning balance. And when we determine applications, there will always be factors that pull in different directions. Clearly, the loss of best and most versatile land is a significant adverse consideration. It's a material consideration to be weighed into the balance. At the same time, the rehabilitation of the Ironbridge Power Station site and its constructive use has very substantial community and sort of economic benefits for the council. And
Potentially, not proved yet, but potentially has benefits.
well, I think that all of these issues, as I say, will be weighed up ultimately when we're making our recommendations to the planning committee, having regard to the policies, having regard to the comments received from locals and the consultees, and also having full regard to the adopted planning policies that we have, and obviously the presumption that this will be a strategic site, including the green area, is a material consideration in that planning balance, as is the loss of best and most versatile land and other factors. In the end, we have to weigh all these factors up, and let me emphasise, no decision has been taken, no sort of indication. We're in an information gathering phase at the moment. That's what we want, is the sort of feedback that we're getting at the moment. And in the end, we put it all in the pot and see which side it comes down on.
No, you answered the questions very well, so thank you for that. My one concern I've heard from you personally this evening is I'm slightly concerned you mentioned before that you need to develop the western site so that they can then do the demolition, which again then causes you to be slightly prejudiced, because if you want the demolition to go ahead, you almost have to then physically approve the western development. And what I implore of the council is to actually ignore all preconceptions and just view the applications in isolation of their own merits. And to be honest, I don't care if Harworth don't make a profit. And as a council, I don't think you should be interested in their business plan either. You just need to look from an objective lens. But what you said to me slightly worries me a little bit when you say, no, I've been drained by Harworth, I've now infiltrated by Harworth, they need to turn up process and make sure they do it.
Not at all the case. So let me emphasise, no decisions have been taken here. We have no preconceptions about this. Our job is to ensure an open, fair and sort of comprehensive evaluation of this application. In terms of the situation with the green lands and the cost issue that you mentioned, cost isn't a material planning consideration in sort of normally financially, but where it has a bearing on deliverability, the National Planning Policy Framework, which is the national guidance on planning, emphasises the need to secure deliverable sites, particularly housing sites. And if there are financial offset considerations that have a significant bearing on deliverability, then it is legitimate for us to take them into account. But no decisions have been taken. All of this goes into the planning balance, and we look forward to receiving your comments in order that we can put those in there as well.
How would the Mines Hill with a doctor's surgery? You have all these people. At our surgery, we've got 3,000 patients. We can't cope with what we've got at the moment. You've got no plans to build a medical practice down here because we haven't got the staff to put in it, have we?
Again, delivery of healthcare and indeed education, these are areas of essential core infrastructure, and the capacity has to be there for the number of people over the time. But bearing in mind it's a 15-year scheme, so not all the houses will be occupied initially if it progresses, but clearly the healthcare provision will need to be factored in. And I know that there are capacity issues with the existing provision at the moment. I think that it's in Ironbridge, isn't it? And I think we're having a detailed discussion with Telford and Wrekin on that issue. And as Buildwas Parish will be creating its shopping list of expectations, so we will have an equivalent list with Telford and Wrekin, and the healthcare will form part of that list.
So if you've got concerns, then again about the provision of healthcare, let us know, because that's something that we can play back into the discussions with the applicant.
Thank you, Graham.
What sort of new houses are you building? Are they going to be carbon neutral?
Yeah,
that's another good question.
We will be promote. This is a keynote development. It's very important. It's a sort of iconic location. It's high profile, and I think that Shropshire Council has just declared a climate emergency, and we have our Green Councillor who is leading on the preparation of a climate emergency response plan. And it isn't rocket science to conclude that higher standards in house sustainability is something that will emerge from that. It hasn't yet been sort of finalised, but I anticipate that we will be seeking the very highest of standards for these properties with renewable energy, electric vehicle charging and high insulation qualifications.
So as a village, will we have an input into the type of houses then?
Through the parish council and its sort of dialogue with ourselves, most certainly any comments that the parish wishes to put forward of a material land use planning nature, we will take them on board.
I think we're very mindful that it's now sort of coming up to sort of the close of the meeting. So if anyone has sort of any items for their shopping list that you would like to, one second.
About what you talked about, the government's guidelines on climate change, etc. The housing, if it goes ahead, will it be carbon neutral?
It has yet to be determined. Basically, at the moment, we have an outline application.
Does that mean a yes or a no?
We can't say. We can't say.
This is 1,000 houses, 2,000 cars, 4,000 people. Should there be some offset in taking greenfield sites? Surely, as an offset, we have to insist that it's carbon neutral.
We not necessarily carbon neutral. We fully support the objectives of constructing highly sustainable houses. However, it is premature because we're dealing with an outline application. What happens is that if that outline application is approved, then a reserve matters comes forward, and also there are various conditions associated with the outline application. When those conditions are discharged, they may well include the specifications for the sustainability of those properties. When the reserve matters comes forward, it may be included in that as well. We have effectively a second bite of the cherry with this, and it is at that stage, if the outline is approved, that we will be seeking the detailed commitments regarding the sustainability of property. It's not appropriate for us to do it at this stage, it's premature, but we can make it clear what our expectations are to Harworth, and we will do.
Well, because they should, because Harworths are selling plots of 1,000 houses. We're talking some serious £1 million of money. £100,000 per plot. That's £100 million that they're going to get. just do the maths. £100 million from a £5 million investment. I can't see that should be ignored.
It won't be ignored, but your question was, are you going to require it? And what Graham was saying was, we'll require the development in accordance with the policies. So at the moment, there isn't a policy requiring the housing to be carbon neutral. We can ask for it. We're interested. That's why we're saying, what are your views? And what do you know? This lady here said, what are the houses going to be like? Well, that can be everything from what they look like aesthetically to their sustainability credentials, can't it?
And on record, so we're talking some serious money. We're not talking £3 million, £5 million.
Appreciate that.
We're talking about a huge amount of money.
Thank you.
I do have one final question.
No. Can we just wait? Sorry, we just wait. There's a lady been waiting there for a while now. So, would you like? Sorry.
Going back to the gravel and sand extraction, because this is a windfall site, this extra 1.9 million tonnes, are there definite markets for that? Because it's more than Shropshire needs, because it's not one of the sites listed in Sandev MD5. So what will happen if there is no market for it?
That's an extremely good question, and it obviously shows some knowledge of the council's mineral policies. So thank you for that.
Well done.
Basically, there is in Sandev Policy MD5 an allowance to consider windfall sites that are not formally adopted in the council's sand and gravel sort of policies. Now, say that the current Sandev plan is getting to be a bit long in the tooth. It was adopted in over 5 years ago now, and it's the mineral elements should have been reviewed together with the housing, but it hasn't. It will be maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. But in the meantime, greater reliance on the windfall policy is being had. And what that basically says is we will support windfall sand and gravel sites, provided they don't have adverse environmental consequences, provided they don't prevent the bringing forward of other existing allocated sites, and provided that there is an identified need for the mineral. Now, those are 3 key tests, absolutely key, that we will be reviewing as part of this application. We haven't made up our minds, nothing is determined. We'll be looking very closely at those key tests.
Okay, so we've got 2 more questions, and then at the end, if there's anything that you need then to pass on as questions, or anything that you need answers and we need to pass on, if you can forward them to ourselves, and we'll do what we can to support that. But if we can go to yourself.
Hi Graham. Back to the gravel application. You mentioned possible restoration as an ecology park, or I know it's an outline, but when does that actually get decided, and will the parish council have an involvement in the discussion about what it's restored to, and how is it going to be maintained? Who's going to be responsible for it? How's that financed? I suppose that same question about finance and management goes to the other application as well. There's lots of open space there.
In fact, I say the outline would sort of overprint on any restoration scheme for the mineral site if it were approved, if it progressed. And it's a very good question. I think it's about 46% of the total area of this large landholding is not proposed for development. There's a huge opportunity there to enhance biodiversity and facilitate better public access. So it becomes a real amenity for all the local people, and not just for the people that live in this location if it proceeds. The way that we look at this, if we're dealing just with a housing scheme of this size, they would normally have a management company, and each resident would pay into a pot annually, which sort of funds the management. In this case, the proportion of green land in the restoration and the biodiversity potential relative to the development is pretty high. And I think we need something else in addition to relying on the residents to just do this. I think we may need some form of an endowment from the company in order to underwrite the benefits that this green area will deliver as a resource. There are huge expectations from my colleagues in the ecology department who have been involved in a very detailed level with all the protected species, and the newts have been translocated. They've built a purpose-built bat house, would you believe? And there are many other species where the opportunity to really improve upon the habitat, because whilst we've got best and most versatile land at the moment in the western part of the site, it isn't actually a very substantial habitat in its own right. Some of that land will be going back to woodland and scrub and acid grassland and probably calcareous grassland in that because it's near limestone. But there's an opportunity to create a whole mosaic of habitats, interconnected habitats, but it has to be correctly funded and it has to be correctly delivered. We're not allowed to condition things for more than 5 years, so we can require something to be looked after for 5 years, and then that's it. If we impose a legal agreement, there's no time limit for how long we can require these things to be looked after. What we need to do is start building our shopping list, and this is one of the items very high up on that shopping list, that we secure the potential benefits that the green areas, the green corridors in this site can deliver for the benefit not just of the occupants there, but the whole of the local community in this area.
Thank you. We unfortunately have come to the end of time. And I'd like to say a massive thank you to Graham and Ian for attending. It's been massively helpful to myself, and I hope some benefit to you. Obviously your views are really important, so please put those forward in emails, by telephone, because then we can include them in our response. But thank you all for coming as well. Thank you. Thank you.